Everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Welcome to another edition of the AJOG MFM Highlights. I am Dr. Mhatre. I'm a maternal fetal medicine specialist at Tufts Medical Center in Boston and the director of the MFM Fellowship at Tufts. And here always my partner in crime, Dr. Drs Berghella. Vince, nice to see you.
Good to see you, Mo. Good morning.
So for everyone who's not familiar with our format, we select 4 articles that we want to highlight from this month's issue. Vince, you want to pull it up on the screen? You can see the list right here. We're going to do, a high-level overview using visual abstracts, and we're trying to highlight articles that are a robust study design and also applicable not only to our MFM colleagues, but also to all of the obstetrics providers to try to give you the most latest up-to-date information about evidence-based care for pregnant patients, both inpatient and outpatient in the clinic. You can feel free to please read the articles in detail on the AJOG MFM website. And Vince, why don't we get started with the first case?
Yeah, the first one, it's about induction of 38 weeks for large first gestational age or microsomic fetuses with a primary outcome of looking at cesarean delivery. It's a meta-analysis of randomized trial. There are about 5 randomized trials, one published recently called the Big Baby Trial. And there are 2 kind of large trials out of this 5, over 4,000 patients randomized. Basically, the meta-analysis showed that induction of labor at 38 weeks lowers C-section risk by 13%, significantly so, without increasing maternal and neonatal morbidity significantly, so that about 25 inductions need to be done to avoid 1 C-section. And again, because of the largest trial did the induction at 38 and 0, 38 and 4, it looks like, the evidence points to, if you're considering an induction for LGA, to do it at that gestational age. And LGA, again, at the biggest trial, was an estimated fetal weight above the 90th percentile. Some studies define as macrosomia more than 4 kilos and other things, but if you look at the data, I think the strongest is if you're doing estimated fetal weight, late in pregnancy, let's say after 36, 37 weeks, and you find LGA above the 90th percentile, there is now pretty good evidence that an induction at 38 weeks up to 38 and 4 would decrease C-section. And I know this is a very hot topic, very hotly debated. So read this article. I think it's a little bit more recent data.
Our second paper to present is a paper from a group in New York, and this is looking at racial and ethnic disparities in early cervical length screening and spontaneous preterm birth. So we know that obviously there's a high percentage of spontaneous preterm birth in the United States, and certainly there is significant data showing racial disparities in rates of recurrent spontaneous preterm birth. And so this group wanted to evaluate whether there are actually some differences in cervical length screening and subsequently cerclage placement, as well as recurrent preterm birth rates between different self-identified races and ethnicities. So in this group at New York, they did a retrospective cohort study looking at a single academic health center at about 924 patients who had 2 deliveries, the first one being a spontaneous preterm birth, and the second one within 5 years. It was from 2019 to 2024, so pretty recent data. And they looked at the self-reported race and ethnicity of all of these patients, and then evaluated if across this particular health system, how many had a 16 to 18 week cervical length screening, which we know is recommended for patients with a prior spontaneous preterm birth, how many received a cerclage, how many had recurrent spontaneous preterm deliveries, and was there differences based on the reported race and ethnicity. So overall, about a third of patients, or a little less than a third of patients, actually had an early cervical length screen. More often if they had a very early preterm birth in the past. There was about an adjusted odds ratio of about 1.8 in the non-Hispanic Blacks compared to non-Hispanic whites. So more were getting screened. Overall, about a 26% recurrent preterm birth rate and higher in the non-Hispanic Black, which is in line with prior data. But the good news was that amongst all of the patients who had early cervical length screening, recurrent preterm birth was the same across the racial and ethnic groups. And so, I think there's a lot of factors in play, right, of how patients get care and what is involved in recurrent preterm birth. But what at least this system seems to show is that when they're able to have consistent and equitable implementation of the screening and treatment, is that they're able to mitigate some of those preterm birth rates and actually equilibrate that across the group. So I do think that that's a nice step in the right direction, but not always applicable to everywhere in America, and certainly a lot more work to understand why some patients are going to have preterm birth more often than others.
Next study is a randomized trial, also on cerclage. This is adding azithromycin to improve latency in physical exam indicated cerclage. Small trial. So these are all singleton gestations, dilated cervix. We do know from a prior trial by Miller that cefazolin and indomethacin help, Hancef and indomethacin help. So that's what the first group there on the slide was given, the control group, and then the intervention group to Hancef and indomethacin, they added azithromycin. If you think of the preterm birth infectious milieu, often azithromycin can help. Think about PPROM and other latent antibiotics, etc. It was a small trial. They didn't find really much of a difference in latency, preterm birth rates across cutoffs, gestational delivery, and infectious choreo, as well as morbidity and morbidity in general. Again, it's a small trial, so if you look at the data, you could see a little trend here and there. I think that we need to probably identify better which patients may be farther along in infection inflammation, for which azithromycin may be helpful. I know a lot of people would do amniocentesis in patients that are 1, 2, or more centimeters dilated, and maybe in the future, some of those findings may help us kind of guide better which antibiotics and how long to give it, etc. But I thought this was a very well done trial, deserving attention. More to come on this issue.
Yeah, this was a great paper. Thanks so much for adding this. And the last paper we wanted to present today was a secondary analysis of an RCT. This is looking at the impact of induction of labor on cesarean risk and on maternal and neonatal outcomes by gestational age for those who have a previous cesarean delivery. This is a secondary analysis of the LUS trial. So, what this group was trying to evaluate is there a difference in patients who are trying to have an induction and they are a prior, they're a TOLAC? Is there a right gestational age that's going to optimize reducing the risk of cesarean delivery and optimizing their chance of having a vaginal delivery? And so this group looked at the LUS trial, which had randomized patients based on the ultrasound measurement of the lower urinary segment. And they had randomized those to either expected management for a planned vaginal delivery or a planned C-section versus controls who had none of that and just had standard of care counseling and timing of delivery. And so they looked by weeks based on 38, 39, 40, and 41 of having a scheduled induction for a TOLAC versus expectant management. And they found that the sweet spot seemed to be at 40 weeks, that if you had an induction at 40 weeks, you had a lower C-section rate than continuing the pregnancy and trying for expected management. You can see the differences are about 38.5% if you had an induction versus a C-section rate for expected management of about 56%. And that they're looking at a composite of neonatal and maternal outcomes doing this did not increase a rate of neonatal or maternal morbidity, which is excellent since we are always concerned about that with, the risk of uterine rupture and hemorrhage, that we don't want to cause harm. But this does seem to suggest that inductions for Tolax at 40 weeks will decrease your cesarean rate and may not affect morbidity. So really interesting data to add to how we're going to counsel patients about this, about their next delivery, and more to come from there.
Thanks, Mo. Another great session. We'll see you next month. Go ahead, finish it up.
Yes, thanks everyone for joining. We'll see you for May 2026 highlights. And once again, thanks for tuning in and take care. Have a great day.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thanks.